The NES was my first video game system, and growing up, I enjoyed a couple of key titles that would solidify my love for the pastime. A little later in life, on the cusp of teenagerhood, I ended up with a used Game Boy and a handful of games from a neighbor, and among them were ones that I sunk countless hours into, like the Super Mario Land titles and Link's Awakening. The Game Boy library is filled with all sorts of things. There are adaptations and ports of older games to the handheld realm, but there are also many follow-ups, spin-offs, or brand new takes on some beloved NES series. As I've jumped deeper into the Game Boy library, I've played a few games that have given me some more mileage out of my NES experiences, and I want to highlight a few that I've really enjoyed so far. Balloon Fight was a staple that I played on many a bootleg multi-cart for the NES, but truth be told, there are only so many times that I can crash and drown before I get bored. I was thrilled to learn of a spin-off that expanded concepts from the single-screen NES game and folded some side-scrolling into the recipe. In Balloon Kid, you play as Alice, who has to save her little brother Jim after he's been swept away by a large gust of wind. The goal is to pursue him through all of the stages, which typically requires hanging onto your own balloons for dear life. Avoiding obstacles and innately pointy enemies that are at work to poke holes in your efforts is the key here, but losing both balloons doesn't necessarily translate into a death. If you're fast enough, you can pump up a new set of balloons, but in some areas, levels are designed to compensate for people who prefer to keep both feet on the ground as well. I enjoyed that there was more to this adventure than flying in a single direction and getting to a goal at the end. There were times where you'd have to shed your balloons to get into small spaces, and there were also quite a few secrets to uncover if you played things right. I also appreciated the slow incline with respect to the difficulty. Balloon Kid does a fantastic job of teaching new players how all of its mechanics work one piece at a time, which allows for a more customizable play experience versus forcing a specific path or strategy. With plenty of opportunities to get extra lives and some great music as your companion, there's a lot to love in this short little rescue mission. On the NES, there are 3 Castlevania games that carved a path for a fantastic series to take hold. The platforming formula of the first and third games that made everyone fall in love with the Belmont family continued on the Game Boy, and while I should mention Castlevania Adventure here, its sequel is a far superior installment that ditched the sluggish controls and kicked up the quality significantly. Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge follows the events of Adventure, where Christopher Belmont is out to rescue his son from Dracula's clutches. There are a handful of lengthy stages to conquer in whatever order you like, and they also have a great balance of horizontal and vertical platforming. The level design was intuitive, but also expected some thinking from the player when finding a way forward. In these sections, my actions and skill, or a lack thereof in some cases, made my journey easier or harder. I loved these puzzle moments. They were a great addition to the customary jumping around and whipping everything in sight. The only real downer on the gameplay side was the shrunken arsenal of sub-weapons. My favorite one to use in the NES games is the boomerang, and they pulled it out in favor of keeping only the holy water and the axe instead. Even still, the whip and sub-weapon combat still felt great, even with fewer options to choose from. I also really liked how this game looked overall. Apart from the many variations on bricks and ropes that you'll have to endure, the area's specific features like tall stained glass windows, chandeliers, and decorative pillars spice things up considerably, matching the effort in the sprite work for the enemy monsters and bosses. Alongside the spooky cast of monster characters out to get you, one of the most notable parallels from the earlier games is the outstanding soundtrack that layered in plenty of atmosphere, which fuels your momentum from start to finish. Snake Rattle and Roll is an isometric platformer where you play as a couple of adventuring snakes. The goal of each stage is to eat enough of the local nibbly-pibbly population to become long and large enough to tip a scale that opens the door to the next stage. The method of attack is a good old-fashioned snake-tonguing, and you'll have the displeasure of taking down feet, toilet seats, and sewer lids to reveal power-ups or add to your points total. Sneaky Snakes takes the same premise with all of its quirks and repackages it into a side-scrolling platformer where 2 different adventuring snakes are out to rescue a friend this time. By eliminating the complication of isometric platforming, the gameplay here feels simplified by a large margin while still displaying plenty of originality in its design. One notable difference is that the Nibbly Pibblies are no longer simply birthed from a machine tucked into the corner of a stage, but instead burst forth from the environments in creative ways. While I like the level design and the challenge of the original game, I was grateful to be able to say goodbye to the checkerboard aesthetic and welcome forests, mountains, and deep waters to explore in their absence. Sneaky Snakes is a true homage to the NES game that came before it, but different enough to feel like it's its own experience all the same. It's definitely worth a visit. Kid Icarus on NES is a game that felt impossible to get anywhere in when I was younger, but after many failed attempts, I finally made it through. Without too much time to rest on my laurels, I learned that the eggplant shenanigans didn't end here and actually continued over in a brand new adventure on the Game Boy. Kid Icarus of Myth and Monsters sees you once again taking up the role of Pit sometime in the distant past. He's been called upon by Palutena to defend Angel Land and maintain its peace against an invading force. This game embodies much of what made the original great, but brings in a few twists to make it feel fresh again. It has the same tricky platforming and adorable enemies to thwart your every move, but I was happy to find more open-ended exploration since the bottom of the screen is no longer a looming death trap. My favorite parts of the adventure were in the dungeons that were both huge and daunting, with eggplant wizards lurking around every corner. Shops and challenge rooms for upgrading Pit's attack frequently appeared, granting plenty of opportunities to become stronger and better equipped to take on everything that this game throws at you. Some of the bosses you'll face make for some challenging moments that can be frustrating sometimes, but even with a few difficulty spikes, it still feels a lot more approachable than its predecessor. The Wizards and Warriors series stretched over 3 NES games, and right between the second and third, Wizards and Warriors X Fortress of Fear was unleashed unto the world. The NES trilogy is known for its memorable music and exploration-centric gameplay that takes you, a knight named Kyros, through many different places on the search for the distressed damsel of interest. The story is the same in Fortress of Fear, but here the level design is way more linear since the only goal is to get to the end of each stage without meeting any other prerequisites. The journey takes place entirely within the walls of the fortress, and while I was initially sad that I wouldn't be hopping through the treetops or walking around underwater again, I was intrigued at the possibility of what trials could be conjured up within those limitations. One of my favorite parts of this game is exactly that. The details of the level design make this one of the most treacherous buildings to travel through, with countless small platforms that you can barely get onto, extremely specific jumps to tall places seemingly out of reach, all while there's a non-stop barrage of enemies pummeling you from start to finish. On the bright side, at least your sword swing actually does something in this one. For me, the gameplay started feeling fun when I got a handle on memorizing layouts and patterns and got into the flow of each stage. After that, it felt like a mesmerizing dance when I was finally able to put all of the pieces together, and I've rarely felt as proud as I did seeing the end screen for this one. Even though much of the adventuring has been sucked out of this particular Wizards and Warriors game, it still has some solid platforming, a mountain of challenge to overcome, and one of the best soundtracks I've heard on the system. Along with these 5, I have plenty more Game Boy games to bring some more of my NES experiences a bit further. I'd love to hear about any favorites among these that you might have, or any suggestions of some others that are worth playing.